a year to get this. I'm not going to give you a cure. That's one shot, maybe 3, and then you're done. And you're back to living healthy. But I keep you with it. You got to keep coming back to it. You know, the government is pushing just like everybody else. Prison is a billions and billions of dollar industry. Coal crack. They make so much money off of us. Why would they want to reform anything? Why would they want to stop anything? I don't get it.
I discovered that the co-founder of Core Civic, Terrell Don Hutto, started his career actually running a cotton plantation prison in Texas. It was the size of Manhattan, where inmates were forced to pick cotton, meet cotton quotas. He lived on the plantation with his family. He had what was called a houseboy, an African-American prisoner who had to serve his family. He ran the Arkansas prison system, which was entirely made of plantations. A federal judge had condemned what he called torture under Hutto. Inmates who refused to labor in the fields were put naked in solitary confinement. And he would run these plantations at a profit to the state. And it was his work and his ability to run prisons at a profit that attracted a couple of businessmen who proposed to him that they start a new company that became the Corrections Corporation of America.
Public policy is established primarily to protect the citizen. It should be established to protect the citizen. However, when you look at the public policy as it relates to the prisons and the way that states and the federal government are going to operate prisons, then it helps to know what are the motivating factors behind the policies that they're going to set. If in fact they have gone into business with private prison companies, then those private prison companies who are partnered essentially with the government to provide prison services for them are going to have incentives to make money. That's what companies and corporations do. They want to make money. So now when you have people who are being sentenced for crimes to society, and the government's job is to protect society from those among us who won't follow the everyday norms and rules of society, you're going to have to look at how they're going to structure those prison sentences. Are those prison sentences being structured to just have someone pay their debt to society and make sure that the society is supposed to protect from someone who's deviant to the norms? Or are those sentences being structured to help to build the bottom line of a corporation with whom the government is partnered with? So, you have to look at the motivation behind those policies to find out, are they there to protect the people, or are they there to help someone else report good for earnings?
These guys get the toughest assignments there are for fires, and they're only paid $1 an hour. Because if you act like an inmate, I'm going to treat you like an inmate. If you act like a firefighter, I'm going to treat you like a firefighter, and I do them both well.
It's like going into combat, and that's what we're doing out there, really.
Are you shoulder to shoulder with the CAL FIRE firefighters?
Yes. Yeah, we cut line together. We be out there. We're not split up from them. Like, we're not like, oh, bring inmates over here and them. Nah, it's not like that. We all out there together. We all out there helping each other. Like, if I walk by one and I see a CAL FIRE or any firefighter and he need help or something with the hose or something like that, I help them. Because they'll help us too. We all here to help each other and make sure everybody's safe.
How much money do you make?
$1 an hour.
When you're fighting the fire?
Yes, when you fighting the fire, $1 an hour.
So for example, last night, how long were you fighting the fire?
Probably 20-something hours. So we probably made $20, $22, $24.
What do you think of that?
Well, I think we should make, of course I would say anybody that got a job, you would think you should make more. I thought we was getting $2 until I came to fire camp. But it's It's cool though. I mean, we making money for something that we'll probably do for free anyway, just for the time cut. So it's all right. But I would prefer, yes, we get more money. Of course, anybody in a working position will want to make more money.
So you're saving the state, to say the least, a lot of money. Some say it's something like $100 million a year.
I don't know. I mean, of course that, I'm sure, but I mean, we don't even, some people don't even, we look at it as getting the time. The time cut is more than the money to us. We'd rather make the money for sure because we can still send money to our families. We still send money home, but yeah, we only make $1 an hour on the fires.
Can you vote?
No felons can vote.
You know, that's interesting because in Vermont and Maine, they can vote from jail.
No felons can vote in California.
Would you like to see that change?
Yes. But we can't talk about it.
This is, guys,
Okay.
camp only.
Okay.
Not voting politics.
Okay.
Camp only.
Some may not know is almost half of those men and women fighting fires are convicted felons.
23 ABC's Alyssa Flores visited one of the state's 44 conservation camps where inmates saved the state tens of millions of dollars on the life-threatening job in exchange for an earlier release.
Like some of the hardest work I've done.
Make sure that the burn area doesn't get to the non-burned area, which make the fire spread.
12 hours at work and 24 hours to rest.
Hernandez, clear.
But it's not money these inmates are working for. It's their future freedom.
Hey, crew 2 and 4, breakfast is ready.
Most of my life I've been in prison, and it's basically the taxpayers that have been providing for me. So when they say I'm underpaid, it's a matter of perspective. To me, I'm overpaid because I'm being paid back with freedom.
I mean, for the inmates, the taxpayers, it's a win-win.
As California wildfire seasons continue to become more destructive every year, the state's 2,500 inmate firefighters are valuable resources, coming at next to nothing in cost and saving the state about $100 million per year.
There's people behind here, good people, very good people that's back here working and pretty much breaking their backs out here for CAL FIRE and CDC to actually protect homes.
They are told they will never, ever be allowed to be a firefighter.
Currently, you cannot be a felon and become an EMT firefighter.
It's bad enough that they've done that, but now they have put into place in those contracts a mandate that the jails have to be kept to a certain capacity. To my knowledge, it's about 90% capacity that they sign these contracts for in order to keep it running. So obviously, then, structurally, you're going to do things like not give the proper funding to services like legal aid services and stuff like that. You're going to overwhelm your legal aid society because those are the ones who are handling legal services for the people at the bottom who can't afford proper legal representation. And therefore, you're going to create a feeder system into the jail in order to meet that 90% requirement. And your policies are going to reflect that.
They get to cherry pick the type of inmates they bring in, and usually they have these contracts that has like a clause, and it's a minimum occupancy clause, right? And it says 90% of our beds need to be full, and if they're not, the state still has to pay for the empty beds.
But the idea or the notion that making profit at the expense of prisoners and their families is pretty disgusting to me.
If you're looking at dealing with the overall of it, and whether I as an individual believe that we should be treating inmates as cattle and selling them and buying them and making sure that our prison is full of as many people as we can cram into a little space so we can make the most amount of money that we possibly can, there's something seriously wrong with that. People are people. They're in there. They're paying their debt to society, regardless of what they did. Should they be a bargaining chip? Should they be used as profit? Should they be seen as dollar signs? I think when we as a community and as a nation have come to that point, something has went seriously wrong.
This is racist. Racist as hell. Continually, and that the vestiges from slavery, we see them every day manifested in the criminal justice system. And it is almost like the United States government said, we are aware that we have to abolish slavery, but we also need to make sure that we keep this commodity available to us, that is black bodies. And so we have to figure out a way. And so there were things that were done, like the Fugitive Slave Act and things of that nature, that this is still the same. So we don't have slave catchers, we got cops. And they do the same thing. They over-police the neighborhoods of color. And they don't do that. Like, I live in a neighborhood where it's very mixed. It's not an urban neighborhood. It's in the suburbs. You never see the cops on my block. You don't see the cops. They do what's called reactive policing. That means that they don't come unless they're reacting to you. And that means they don't come unless you call them. That's not what happens in urban communities. They do proactive policing, meaning that they sit on your block. They stop you when you're walking. They ask you where you're going, what you're doing, let me search you. They don't do that in white. So if you over-police a community, then they will be disproportionately represented in the criminal justice system. If you look at some of the case law, if you look at some of the language from early cases when the Supreme Court was speaking about black people and how we have no rights that any white man should ever have to respect, that we are not citizens. We were not citizens in this country until the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment, and if you go back in the history of that, there are some states, like I want to say Mississippi, that didn't ratify things like 13th and 14th Amendments until 50 years later or more. So what it says about our society is that this is still a white supremacist run country. And unfortunately, they have put things in place, structures in place, and real structures just that have proliferated and perpetuated this disproportion that we see in the prison system.
This boils down to bias. This boils down to racial injustice. This boils down to a system of oppression amongst folks of color. In looking at same crime, there was a case in the news, I want to say about a year or two ago, where a young fella, white guy, star on the swim team, was basically charged with rape. This was something that he actually did it. You had witnesses that pulled him off of this young lady. It was very traumatizing for her, and he received a slap on the wrist. Whereas other cases, we have it all over the country where, a young football player in another college, the circumstances behind it was he say, she say, whatever, and this individual got years for this particular crime. So we see it in all manner of our society today. I don't care if you're from New York State, California, Arizona, you name it, we see this disparity. And it's sickening. There's a system of oppression that's occurred throughout this country. Black individuals are 10 times more likely to be arrested for a crime than white individuals, even if it's the same crime. And there's cases where in the federal system, you have a black individual will serve more time or roughly the same time for a nonviolent drug offense than a white individual will serve for a violent drug offense. So this system has shown that, there is racial disparity along the lines of how justice is meted out in our community. So that's one area.
I call it selective prosecution. Unfortunately, most of the prosecutors in this country, I want to say over 95% of them are white. Most of the people they prosecute don't look like them. Okay? I recently had a case in federal court where it was alleged that there was a slip and fall scam going on that involved a number of doctors and lawyers and then some cab drivers. Cab drivers who would shuttle patients to the lawyers and the doctors' offices. The federal government decided to charge just the black drivers. They didn't charge a white doctor, and there were several of them, or any white lawyers, and there were several of them, because they didn't have to, because they have absolute discretion in who they prosecute, because they get to choose who the criminals are, and they get to choose what evidence is sufficient. Now, here's another thing. Oftentimes, violent crimes are witnessed by black and brown people because crime happens typically in these communities, right? That means that the witnesses are going to be black and brown people. Prosecutors selectively prosecute black and brown people because juries, whether they are black or white, juries are more inclined to convict black people based on the testimony of black people than they are to convict white people based on the testimony of black people. Prosecutors know this. And when they are evaluating a case, whether it's a state case or a federal case, and they're trying to determine whether it has what we call prosecutorial merit, and whether or not you can prove that case beyond a reasonable doubt, one of the things you have to assess is your evidence. Your evidence. And if your evidence is 3 or 4 witnesses from the local projects who speak bad English, like we saw in Trayvon Martin's, the woman who came and testified, who was on the phone with him. Well, I don't know if anyone recalls how the media pounced on her because she didn't speak the proper King's English. But to many of the people who were listening, she sounded fine, right? Because some of us understand broken, I don't know if you want to call it, I don't like the ebonics term, but that genre or that dialect of English that's found in the hood, right? And so she got pounced on. Prosecutors don't like to use witnesses like that. When it comes to white defendants, they will never do it. They won't do it. They will not. At least not in my experience. So I think that has a lot to do with it. When you selectively prosecute black and brown people, then they will disproportionately appear in jail. That's it. Because it's not that black or brown people are more violent than white people. Look at the history of this country. Right? The history of this country tells us that white people have always savaged what they couldn't have. Savage what they wanted. And if they couldn't get it, they took it.
Seneca Village was an African-American and Irish community that was founded in the mid-1820s, and it continued to exist until the park was created in the 1850s. Everybody was evicted from their homes in Seneca Village in 1857.
Which is why very few people know about its existence now in the 21st century.
However, the first African Americans arrived here in the mid-1620s with the Dutch colonists, and African Americans have had a strong presence ever since.
Many people forget that there was slavery here, that much of New York was built with enslaved labor.
We had slavery here in New York until 1827, when emancipation finally was completed.
And in fact, sadly, slavery continued in New York until 1841.
After 1827, when emancipation was completed for New Yorkers, it was still possible, if you were a slave owner from out of state, to bring your slaves as property into the state until 1841.
New York, because it became the financial center of the United States, had important financial ties to the South and to slavery, and so much of the wealth that came into New York was derived from slave labor. The purchase of land not only bought you a piece of property, one also was purchasing the right to vote.
There was an amendment to the New York State Constitution that said that if you were an African American male, you would be able to vote if you owned $250 or more property, and if you had resided in New York for more than 3 years.
And of course, you had to be male.
And we also think that it was a black middle class community.
We know, for example, that skilled tradesmen worked here. We've identified one of the inhabitants as a cooper, that is, as a man who made barrels. And so the state of New York used its legal power, its powers of eminent domain, to condemn the properties within the boundaries of the park and to evict the residents.
And if black people at any point did manage to pull themselves up by the bootstrap, white people destroyed that too. So it's not that black people are more inclined to commit crimes or anything like that, but this selective policing, right, the proactive policing, coupled with the selective prosecution, directly is responsible for the disproportion that we see in prison.
Well, while I was a New York State parole officer, majority of my parolees were black and Latino. I covered an area called Brownsville, which is the 73rd precinct. About 1% maybe 0.5% of my caseload were Caucasian or white people. In fact, when I was in Staten Island, which has a large white population, I did have a few more whites than regularly, but I still supervised a lot of those brothers from what they call the Charlene or Staten Island, Stapleton, Manners Harbor, and places like that in Staten Island. But normally I had like a very low percentage of white parolees, about 1%.
And I experienced racism on a daily basis when I was in prison in New York State. In fact, I didn't really understand what racism was until I went upstate to prison. You know, anytime they deny you some food, don't allow you to go to the mess hall, that was racism. That was predicated on racism. You know, anytime they get you in the yard, they beat you, that was predicated on racism. You know, they take advantage of stuff like that. You know, anytime you go to a disciplinary hearing and the hearing officer over sentence you for a menial crime, that's predicated upon racism. So I experienced racism daily, and you know, once I became conscious of this, and I had the courage, I would always speak out against it.
I think that protests are extremely important. I think everyone should feel that it's their duty as a citizen to bring awareness to injustice, and I think it is time to have a reform in place. I think it's important to have a screening, a whole entire screening of these police officers. The whole system has to change. Like, when it comes to reforming this broken system, what it takes is communication. It's going to take people coming together on a humane level, and I think if everyone collectively got together, it would make a huge difference. And what would help is having correction officers that are not just officers, but are also social workers. If you look at the models that they have, like in Sweden and Norway, and in the Nordic countries, they treat their prisoners with respect. They treat them like human beings. Here in America has the highest rate of incarceration in the world. If we had education systems in place, if we put less money into correctional facilities and we put it into programming, after school programming, different trade schools, like even in our education system, we're not really teaching people how to get a job, how to manage money, but yet everywhere it tells you how to spend it, it tells you that we need to be all lavish, but like our people are struggling just to get food on the table. So I would say implementing programming, after school programming, more money into the community organizations that exist. I would say having, correction officers be actual social workers so that they're actually treating them on a psychological level. A lot of these police officers aren't even healthy mentally, but yet they are given the power to determine whether someone lives or dies. We have Eric Garner. He was put into an illegal chokehold. It was an illegal chokehold, and he was killed. He was put on camera, and that police officer still has his job, still has his pension, and still has gone free for murder. So I think that we have to really evaluate who it is that our police officers are going to be. I think Japan does that before they even give them a gun. Why can't we do those things? Look at compare the systems that exist that are actually working and implement them here. So those are my ideas.
The average young black and Latino boy or girl living in the hood, they don't see themselves in the hood. They don't see themselves as part of the hood. They just feel that they live here. When you take a picture, a photo of a group of people, and you're in it, the first person you're going to look for is yourself. So they don't have a sense of who they are. They don't know that they have potential. They don't know that they have the ability to overcome any obstacles that may be in their way or in their path. So they have to plan themselves as far as this system is concerned because right now they have what is called a pipeline that makes them set up in a way that they go to prison. So they have to have a plan in order to not fall in those conditions that will put them in prison. I think one of the things that has to do is that the community has to come together. The clergy, the religious institutions, the community centers. When I was growing up, we had community centers. We had mentors, people that cared about us. Families were intact. So we have to get back and continue to have those kind of things and promote those things in our own family. And if we don't, then the community or the neighborhood is robbed of the resources and the power that's in each and every one of these individuals. So the community is a very important, it's a launching pad. It's a nurturing place that all the entire community, whether it's the clergy or the directors of community centers, have to come together and set some foundation and have what is called a life support system. Have a plan. I would give an inmate that's going to be released from prison, first of all, have a plan. Have a plan on how you plan to filter yourself back into the community, because the community is not the same that it was before you went into prison. It's a whole different phenomenon. You left for 10 years, 20 years, 15 years, but it's different. But have a plan on how are you going to make it in your community. Constantly stay in contact with your family, because your family is your only means of support and hope. And if you're in prison and you had an opportunity to develop some skills, get some skills. Because the job market today in America is technology, it's high-tech employment facilities, and you need skills in order to function in the society that you're coming to. Try to find things that you can either volunteer when you come home if you don't have a job, get some training in something that you love and you desire to do, or get some employment, or go to school. That is what I encourage many of them to do, because they are looked upon, as they come out of prison, they are looked upon as scourge in the community. And a lot of the white companies will not hire them. So this is what I encourage.
It's boundless. It's endless. There's no one cure, because the problem is so widespread that it has to be attacked from a number of different angles. And it's not just for the government to do. People have to do. Parents have to do. We all have our part. Everyone has a role. But again, like I said, there are certain structures in place because of the nature and history of this country that are a hindrance to our progress.
And my main objective today is to make sure no other youth end up like me. You know, I go around, I educate youth, I go inside schools, I go inside the schoolyards, I go inside the communities, and I speak to the youth, and I share my life experience with them. And I show them how I fell off, how I strayed away, I deviated from my mother's Christian values and moral teachings. I didn't listen, I thought I knew the answers. And that's how I ended up doing the 27 years. You know, and that's very important to me, because I know them communities upstate, they benefit off of people like me. And I want to break that cycle. I don't want another youth to go through what I went through. And I take that serious, you know. And, you know, today, you know, like one of the things I said when I was leaving prison, I wanted to leave prison as a fireman, because I want to be equipped with all the skills and tools to come out here and put that fire out that's burning in my community. And that's what I want to do today.
Something I was saying earlier about young people not feeling a sense of self. I meet once a week on Sundays, and we have a study group called The Knowledge of Self. The greatest knowledge you can have is the knowledge of self, to know who you are. What's your purpose? What's your aim on this planet? What do you want to do? How do you see yourself? And in this group, we kind of discuss how we can become aware of the things that we need to do as an individual. The other thing that I'm doing in the community, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of discontent. A lot of times these brothers and sisters go to prison because a lot of them dropped out of school very early. They can't read, they're not critical of things, they don't know how to analyze things, but they're bright in terms of what they know about society. They're very aware of what's going around them, but they don't have any directions. Out of that misdirection, they become angry, and they direct their angry at each other.
Over the past couple of years, watching on Facebook, where you see, Philando Castile or these various people killed on Facebook Live for all of us to see. What does that do to a community? What does that do to a people? It shows us there is this lack of justice to begin with. Terrence Crutcher and, him being pulled over for having a stalled vehicle. And, the police in the helicopter saying that's a bad dude who he's later to be killed. Or both Dawn Jean, the police officer who says that she went into the wrong apartment and shoots him fatally. These are various examples that we see that there's plenty of injustice when it comes to these various things. And I, for one, often speak out against it. I do that through my own work. And I think it's important for all of us to realize that this is something we need to do, not just as Black folks, but as people in general, because it can happen to all of us.
The knowledge of self is the greatest knowledge that any human being can have. There are people that have lived and died and never fulfilled their dreams. The sin of not doing anything is a sin that each and every person, and I think about this a lot, has to cope with. If you have a purpose in life, if you can see your purpose and you can do something about it, then you have to do something about it. The reason why a lot of our young men and young women go to prison because they don't see themselves as valuable. You have to see your value in life. And we can control our neighborhoods, and our children need to see that we control our neighborhoods where they can have a sense of hope and a sense of control. When you don't feel that you're in control, then you feel hopeless. So there's a lot of work to be done. We have many of our leaders that left legacies. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm, Kwame Ture, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Adam Clayton Powell. They left a wealth of knowledge that we can use to change the conditions of our community. But we have to use them, but we have to believe that we can make that change. God never changes the condition of a people until they seek to change those conditions themselves. And we have the power to make that change.
As a poet, as an activist, as an artist, to speak about the truth. I have to consider myself a reflection person. I like to mirror the truth and show people, speak about what it is that we're actually going through. This platform is so important to inspire people so that they know that they're not alone, so that they know that they can also find ways to heal the artistry. It's important to me because this platform is what helped me heal from the injustices and the things that I have suffered through. So I think it's important to use this platform and let people know that they can find help too. This is a poem I wrote called If Anybody's Interested. Authorities got hands on their sticks, ready and quick to pull out the proverbial whip, a Glock full of clips while we're driving in our whip. Cops are on their way to market while we're the ones unarmed, not believing we're the target, not recalling that to them we're just a Trayvon Martin, Sean Bell, Eric Garner, human beings being murdered. Whatever happened to serve and protect? They break civilian necks and get a slap on the wrist. Unpoliced police mostly get away with it. I trust police the way I trust the government. In God we trust to see some punishment. We know the system is corrupted. Sometimes they get sentenced for their injustices, but most times they will survive. Done none of it. There's a long list of names spoken over follow roads to nowhere. People growing scared, calling life unfair, complacent, like they don't care, afraid to make a statement. I declare, don't be another slave on the plantation. Divided segregation, displaced like First Nations. Suicide statistics are high in elevation. We're forced on reservations, modern gentrification, drug and liquor integration, militarization, sex cells on every station. It's a third eye invasion, terrorist interrogation, modern day enslavement. The color of your skin is under investigation, racial condemnation, ego inflation, superiority complex implementation. Stop and frisk statistics are rising for the innocent. But if you aren't interested, don't listen to this gibberish. Forget the politics of this matrix that we're living in. It's all part of the system, and it's always gonna be like this if you aren't questioning